so page 449, lesson 6. So this is using an example from lesson 3 where I was talking about the car and how car values depreciate. So the context again, just because if you don't remember, they purchased or Lisa purchased a new car for $20,000, and it can be represented by the formula 20,000 minus 1,250 T, where V is our value in dollars and T is the age of the car. Let's just pause for a second. What is my independent variable here? Go ahead, Khalil. Independent here. Remember, independent is your X equivalent or input. Good, so T. So in this case, that is our time. We're putting in the time to find out our answer. So that makes the value our dependent, our Y value, or our output, V. Which one is my domain? Sorry, say that again. T is our domain, good. And that means V is also our range. A lot of terminology that's really easy to forget. So on my graph, I have my time over here, my value up top. We know this graph is going to have at like time of 0, the day she purchases it, is going to be at 20,000. Right? That's the fresh, brand new car. It's not going to increase in value after that. We're assuming that this vehicle is not like some collector's specialty vehicle or anything like that. Based on this context, can someone describe what this graph should look like? Like thinking about the scenario. Good, right on, Priscilla. It's going to be angled downwards. It's decreasing in value. At some point, it's going to be worthless. Okay, I want you to put this into your calculator, and then we're going to use the Zoom Fit. So if I open up y equals again, clear this off. We're going to do 20,000 minus 1,250. You still use X. And then you're going to hit graph. It makes sense right now. I see no graph, right? My window settings are nowhere close to 20,000, right? They're like negative 30 right now. It's not going to happen there. So if we go to Zoom and go down to Zoom Fit, which is all the way, like, you have to go down one more to 0. Enter, and I see my graph. I personally use Zoom Fit only as like a starting point. It gives me some context here. If I now go to my window settings, I like changing it so I can see it a little bit more. So on my graph, I can't actually see the x-axis, and this just like bugs me. This is 100% my personal preference. I don't like that I can't see it. So I go to my window settings, and I'm going to change my Y minimum. Right now, the minimum value they have for Y is positive 7,500. So they're not actually showing me the x-axis at all in here. So if I go down here and make this like negative 5,000, it's going to go past my x-axis so that way I can see the point where it crosses it. Right now, my Y value, my Y value is only going up by 5. Is that very reasonable? No, right? That doesn't make sense. What actually makes a lot of sense here is if I make it go up by 1,250. That's every year it changes by 1,250, so it's going to give me kind of some nice increments there. Could I do 100? Totally. But now I can see a little bit more. Can I have negative x values on this scenario? No, we're talking about time. Can you have negative time? No. So my x-axis doesn't need to go that far negative, but I also want to go more right. Like I want to see more positive x values so I can see where it's going to cross. So let's go back to our window settings and play with that. So my x minimum is currently at negative 10. I don't really need that. So let's make it maybe negative 5. Let's make our x maximum 20. Now I can see all of those different points. Did I need to go that negative on my y? No. Is that okay that I did? Totally. So my window settings were -5, 20, and 5. So the first question asks, what are your window settings? So we would write them out as x, -5, 20, and I went up by 5. Could you have different answers here? Totally. My y window settings were at -5,000. I think 32,500. And they went up by 1,250. I will ask you a question nearly identical to this one on your test. There's a lot of acceptable answers here. I will be looking at your window settings just to make sure that you can see your intercepts. So did you make it well enough that you can see everything? So then part B, calculate the t-intercept. So t is our x value here of the graph using your calculator and then label it. So remember to calculate our x-intercept, this is where we're going to do second trace, and you're going to go to zeros. Is it 0 or zeros? So second trace, go down to 0. Go to the left side of where it crosses, go to the right side, enter, enter. So we get 16 for our x-intercept. So you could write this out. So you could say t-int like this for like intercept equals 16. That would be like an acceptable final answer. I personally like writing it as a coordinate. That's 16 and 0. Reason why I like doing that is that emphasizes with you that our y value is 0. Because often I will say a question could read, calculate this by hand, calculate this algebraically. So that reiterates to you that you need to plug it in. Go ahead, Claire. No, press enter again when it says guess. Why it says guess, I don't know. It's weird. If it says error, that means your intercept wasn't in between the 2 points. Or likely that's what it means. Anyways, that's the most common thing. Okay, next question. Calculate the v-intercept, so that's our y-intercept of the graph using your calculator. Oh, sorry, I didn't say. What does this mean in the context? So for our x-intercept, this is when the vehicle has no value. It's worthless. You're going to drop it off at a dump shop for scrap metal. So for your v-intercept, we still do second trace, but now we go to value. So second trace, value, when x equals 0, 20,000. Or at 0 and 20,000. This is when the car is brand new. How is that? Does that okay? Make sense? Okay. Did you get it, Claire? Okay, I'll come look. I want you to try D on your own. use the trace feature, it gives you that hint. Determine what your car will be worth after 5 years. So 5 years is then our X value. And good luck. So in this question, you're still going to use that value option because I want to know the value of basically when X is equal to 5. That's what it's asking us. What is Y? So on my graphing calculator, second trace value, X equals 5, and we get 13,750. So that's a different way that you could use that. Use that option. So using this next piece I didn't teach you last day because I thought you might be a little bit overwhelmed. So use the intersect feature of a graphing calculator to determine when the car will be worth half the purchase price. So what is half our purchase price? 10,000. Why they do that to you to make you think ever so slightly more instead of just saying 10,000 beats me. But basically what we want to know, so if this is at 10,000 approximately, I want to know the value right here. So to do this on your graphing calculator, it's not as slick as when you're given your X value. If I had a nice perfect horizontal line right here, what would the equation of that line be? Good, right on, Y equals 10,000. There's no X value. All of the Y's on that straight line are 10,000, right? X is changing, but all my Y values are 10,000. So if you go into your calculator, press Y equals, and then under Y2, put 10,000. And then hit graph. We get that straight line that we just drew. So now you can go second trace and go down to number 5, intersect. And you can find the point where those two lines cross. Am I going fast? Is that okay? So again, first curve, you want to make sure when you're doing it that your curves are a little bit clear. So I'm just going to move my cursor over a little bit. So I make sure my little cursor's on my first line, press enter, make sure it's on your second line. Generally speaking, the prompts here are really correct, so you don't have to move it at all. Enter, enter through guess. So that tells me it intersects at 8 and 10,000. So what that tells me is the blue graph, or my original graph, when X is equal to 8, my Y is 10,000. So this is at 8 and, or you could say 8 years. Write an appropriate domain and range for this. So this is using our function notation, or that fancy notation that Miss Chow taught you the day I wasn't here. So our domain, here I'm fine if you used X or T. Our graph we've labeled with T's, so T is kind of slightly better, but I am totally fine if you used whichever one. So T values such that with that straight vertical line that's kind of obnoxious, between 0 and 16. Because 16 is when the car becomes worthless, then according to our graph, we would get negative values, but really you're not going to have a negative value for your car. Between that T is going to be an element of the reals because it's every single decimal there, right? Because that would account for every day or every hour of that car. Whatever variable you use here needs to be the same variable each time. Do not be switching between X and T. My range are my V values between 0 and 20,000. And then an element of the reals. If you use X for your domain, you should probably use Y for your range just to be consistent. So if you use V, you should use T, right? Kind of make them match up so that way you're consistent there. That's better. Is this notation making sense? How are we feeling about that? We're feeling pretty good? Good. We're at like the halfway point for our unit right now. And then we kind of change gears a little bit with this stuff. So I want to make sure that we really get this. Okay, let's turn the page. We're going to do one more big example. The height of a human cannonball cano can be described by this formula, 12 plus 6t minus t squared, where h is our height in meters above the ground and t is our time in seconds. Cano is projected out of a cannon from the top of a building and it lands on a soft mat. The mat is placed in a hole in the ground, so the top of the mat is level with the ground. So let's graph this calculator in our calculator settings. Something that might be good to do is right now, before I clear everything, I'm going to go to Zoom and go to Z standard, so to 6, just so that way I'm back at like my neutral point of the tens. Otherwise, sometimes you forget that and you feel like you messed up when you typed in your new equation. So y equals, clear both of your equations that are in here. Truthfully, you could put in any y equals. Doesn't have to be the first one. So I'm going to get 12 plus 6x minus x squared. Graph. I want you to play with your window settings. I'm not going to tell you what mine are out loud, to make it so you can see the top of our parabola here. So I can see both x-intercepts, so that's good on mine, but I can't see high enough. So I made my y max 25. I didn't actually change any of my x. I didn't change anything else from the standard settings. I just made my y value higher. Again, you want to see both x-intercepts and your y-intercept. So these are my window settings. Go ahead, Quentin. So then here, you have some guidance. So we'll now with your window. So we're window and looking for y maximum much higher. So let's make that 25. So you have to go down to arrow 2. To y max. Nope, y max, not x. Let's make that 25. Okay, so all I did is like we stretched out this because we want to see the top. Okay, give me a thumbs up. Does everyone see theirs? Almost. Okay, so press second mode. I get mode. Okay, now take an equation. Is everyone else okay? stretch over your y-axis. So with a window and a little y-max. Everyone else okay? Good, good. So you can have different window settings. I mean, totally fine. But you just need to be able to see everything. You don't need to go that high. Make it 25. You could, but it's just going to be really zoomed out. Okay, just graph. No, go to your y equals. Get right, you wrote x2, not x squared. Oh. That's right. Y equals, you typed in your equation wrong. Make this, you put a negative sign, make that a minus x squared. So use your arrow keys. And now here, just press graph. Yeah, press graph. Okay, so question 1 in your workbook, write down your window settings. I just walked by and I think I saw everyone's. So your window settings might be slightly different than mine. That's totally fine. The only thing I changed was my 25. So they want us to sketch the graph for C. What's really important here is there's context to this question. They didn't just say, this is our equation, go. They told us this weird little story about this guy in a cannonball coming out of a building, landing in a mat that's going to land perfectly on flat neutral with the ground because the mat's in a hole. Like, there's a lot of situation with that context, right? And really weird. They're telling you all of this to make you sketch it correctly. So what that means is my graph that we actually care about is like a small snippet from your calculator graph. So there's some height of the building. That's really where he starts. So he starts at some, right now it's an unknown height, but he starts at some height so far up in this building. Then he's going to come down and land perfectly on the ground because the mat, like the thickness of however big this mat has to be, is dug in the ground. So that way when he lands, he's right at 0. So that's the graph we care about. So on my calculator, it's only like a small little portion of this calculator version. So that's really important. Does my graph perfectly mirror what's on my calculator? No. It should slightly be like shifted a little bit more to the right. I don't care. That's fine. This is a sketch. Notice they say the word sketch. That's why we're not labeling all the grid points. I'm looking for the general trend. General trend here, it's a parabola. Great, moving on. So then it says, what is the height of the cannon above the ground? So basically, what is this point? So what's the math term for that point? Good. So this question's really asking, what's your y-intercept? How do we figure out our y-intercept? Good. So we're going to use second trace, and we're going to go to value. So when x is 0, what's our height? 12 meters. Good. The wording of this question, what is the height of the cannon above the ground? 12 meters, right? You have to, again, think back to the context. If you wrote the coordinate 0, 12, yeah, that's the point on the graph, but it's not asking that. It's asking how high is this off the ground. Questions like this, the context really matters. It's also telling me, are you able to apply this math in places? So you actually really have to put it back into the context of the situation. It's really important. What is the maximum height candle reaches? So we want to know like this point right here. So go back to your graphing calculator, and we're going to go second trace, and we're going to go to maximum. So number 4. Maximum, press enter. Left bound, you're going to be left of that max point. Enter. Right bound, you're going to be on the right side of the max point. Same idea with like the x-intercept. You want to make sure that your max point is in between your 2 little arrows. Press enter. So my max height is at 21 meters, approximately 3 seconds. Do you guys get that same? So they don't care about the time, they just want to know the max height. So that would be 21 meters. Our coordinates would be 3 and 21 though. So like my graph is pretty off. This should be much steeper, right? Because I'm going from 12 up to 21. That's okay. How many seconds does it take Cano to reach the highest point that he is traveling? So there's our 3 seconds. Is that okay? Does that context make sense? So it's interpreting it. To the nearest hundredth, so it's 2 decimals of a second, how long does it take Cano to land on the mat? So really, this is asking us for this point here. So on your calculator, we're going to do second trace and down to 0. So press number 2 or use your arrow keys. Enter left side and right side of where it crosses. This one's a little bit trickier because it's fairly steep. Just make sure the point where it crosses is in between those 2 arrows. If you get an error, likely it was like one of those arrows might have been like right on your intersection point. So 100th of a second, I get 7.58. How high is Cano 1 second after he's launched? So in this question, it's actually saying if x is equal to 1, what is y equal to? So that's when we're going to use our value again. So second trace value, x equals 1, y is 17. So he's 17 meters up in the air after a second. When will Cano be at the height in h again? So when is he going to be at 17 meters again? So here's where you can do a couple different options, and there's a couple different ways to play with this. We can use that where we draw the second line in and find your intersect. You can actually use your arrow keys and like move your little cursor over and be like, oh, I'm almost at 17. Depending on how you do this and depending on the question, you might be able to figure it out really easily. Right? Like I'm just playing with it and I'm really close to 17 already. So you can move your arrow keys and it'll tell you at the bottom of your screen your coordinates. Sometimes that's your easiest option. You could also do second graph and open up your data table. So I can see on here 17 is at 1 second, and I could go down on it and I can find 5 seconds too. So there's a lot of different ways you can use your calculator. I personally am one to almost always just put the line in and do your intersect. But truthfully, that's probably one of the slower options, and using your table can be really effective, especially in grade 10, because often we'll do whole numbers. Once you get to 11 and 12, well, it'll be more decimal options that you'll get, and then it's a lot harder. But for us, often your x value here, we're looking for a nice, pretty whole number for you, just to make it a little bit easier. So your data table can be super effective to do that. So it's going to hit, as he like goes back down at 5 seconds, he's going to be at that same height again. Okay, I'm going to skip J. Questions like this, I'm going to accept a lot of answers. So describe the relationship in words. He gets shot up in the air and he comes back down. Like anything about the general trend, that's fine. Let's do domain and range. So we have all x values such that x between what 2 numbers is x between? So between 0, like right as he shot out of the cannon, till he hits the ground at 7.58. Within that, it's every single second in there. So x is an element of the reals. Our range is between 0, because he actually does hit the ground, and 21. And then y is an element of the reals. Let's say the context was slightly changed. Let's say he's shot out of a huge apartment building, shot up in the air, and then there is like one of those weird trapeze mats things at the same height as the apartment building. Your height then, or my range, is going to be cut off at whatever the height of that trapeze mat's at. Or if he like landed in a tree, really unfortunately, whatever the height of the tree was. So your height isn't always going to be like from 0 to the end of it. Again, going back to your context. How is that? That's a lot of information. There's a lot to remember with your calculator. Make sure you're asking a lot of questions about your calculator. Part of my curriculum, part of what you have to know is how to use your calculator. So our test is still a while away, but on your test, I'm not going to be able to answer calculator questions unless it's like your calculator is freaking out and there's something really wonky going on. But if it's like, how do I do this with my calculator? This isn't working. I may or may not be able to answer your questions. You may have to troubleshoot it on your own. So make sure you all are bringing your calculators to class and you have it with you so that way you can be practicing with it. Because of COVID, it's really hard to share them right now too. So it kind of stresses that point even more. The only question I want you to work on today, so we don't have much, I think is number 4, I said. Yeah, number 4. On Wednesday, so our next class, we're going to do an in-class assignment. It's just going to be formative, but it's on the first half of the unit. I want to make sure we really get this stuff before I go on. I hope it's only going to take us a class period to work on. You're going to hand it in so I can actually mark it and see where you're all at. But like open book, you can work with a partner, all that kind of stuff. But it's going to be like a work period on Wednesday. So number 4 is all you have to do right now for me. And then make sure you're up to date on all of our prior questions too. Wasn't here for a couple of days, so I want to make sure we're all on the same page.